welcome to your go-to Detroit Pistons podcast, The Pistons Pulse, co-hosted by me, Bryce Simon of Motor City Hoops and Detroit Bad Boys, a former D1 hooper, current high school coach, teacher, husband, and father of 3 amazing kids.
And I'm Amari Sanko for the second Pistons beat writer for the Detroit Free Press.
Your friend, man, he called you out on Twitter. He didn't call you out. I guess he defended you on Twitter about coming up with this stuff. And he said he had to do a podcast for school or something like that. Shad, I believe it is, a longtime listener, appreciated the support and said, hey, man, this isn't as easy as I thought it was going to be.
No, yeah, my homie Rashad goes by Shad on Twitter.
Oh, Shad, my bad.
Yeah, I've known Rashad since 3rd grade, I think. I don't even went to middle school together. He could probably remind me, but pretty sure 3rd through 5th grade, somewhere in that span is when we first met. But yeah, intros are hard. Intros are not. I feel like our intro is good. I think it's good to have like a consistent, like when the podcast starts, people know exactly what those initial 10 seconds are going to be. And then after those 10 seconds, you don't know what direction we're going to go. We can talk about food. We can talk about basketball. We can talk about literally anything, and you don't know where the conversation is going to go. So, appreciate the support from Rashad. Intros are tough. I recommend having a big family you can brag about just to kind of chew up some of the time, like Bryce does every time. If I was the one leading that off, it would just be extremely quick and right into it because I don't have anything to brag about at all.
I just hope we do this podcast long enough that we can hear Omari Sankofa, at least husband, maybe father of 1 or something like that eventually before, I just hope the podcast lasts that long. So it is an all mailbag episode, Omari. We're going to bring Wes on, our guy. He's going to read those questions and navigate us through the episode. But first, the Pistons did just play a game on Sunday night versus the Lakers. The fan base is again extremely upset with the finish. I understand it. I get it. But like we were talking about before recording, Omari, LeBron and AD went bananas. Lonnie Walker had 20. I don't know how this Piston team beats that Lakers team when those two are going crazy like that.
Yeah, I mean, LeBron and Anthony Davis combined for 69 points. LeBron chips in, 5 assists and 5 rebounds. I think AD had like 15 rebounds and 7 assists. When those two guys play that well, the Lakers should win. Like the only time it should be a coin flip is when you're playing like the Celtics or, like a Golden State team that's like hot that night or just another elite team. But I think on paper, they combined for 69 points. The Pistons, Bogey had his best game of the season, 38 points, but you can't really get a second guy going offensively. And that was just that it is what it is lost. Honestly, I don't think the Pistons played particularly bad. I don't think there's anything in particular that lost them the game. This was just you played 2 of the top 15 guys in the league, and they both had, top 15 nights. And it's just, what can you do? They took them down to the wire. They cut it to 2 with like a minute left and, just couldn't close it out. So, I think this is a loss that to me, if it was football, it'd be like a quote unquote good loss to help you at the end of the year. An 82 game season is just something you can build off of and go from there.
Yeah, and there's some stuff at the end of the game, and I'll probably tweet about it on Monday and have a breakdown and all that stuff. Like, you always want to look into those things and grow those things. I talked about it with you, I think the Pistons could have won a heavy defensive lineup late in the game. I believe they were down 2 in that situation, and Austin Reeves hits a huge, tough, contested 3 in the corner, and Jaden Ivey made a huge mistake helping off strong side corner. But as you say, do you want Jaden Ivey on the bench in that situation because he's one of your worst defenders? Or do you want rookie Jaden Ivey in his 20-whatever game of the season learning from that mistake? Because now tomorrow you can bring Jaden Ivey in and show him the film, and maybe he doesn't make that mistake again. So it's a catch-22. There's pros and cons of it. But at the end of the day, the team competed, and they played a Lakers team at their best to, a 5-point loss. So I don't walk away from tonight that upset. I guess it ended up 7.
And I also think Dwayne's done a good job of kind of fighting that line of that our veterans come in and try to win us this game, and let's give the young guys a chance to show what they could do. And I think as a coach, you're kind of jumping on a grenade when you are coaching a rebuilding team, because a lot of the fan base is still going to measure you by wins and losses, even though there's a night like tonight where maybe it would have been better to bench the young guys. And then you have another part of the fan base who's like, well, you need to give the young guys opportunities, but then you also want to see people win. And you can't do everything at once. Sometimes you're going to put the young guys and they're going to lose. And that's just kind of how it goes. But, I thought tonight was a good night, for Ivy to get those reps. I think he's probably been more down than up over the last month or so, and could just be a rookie slump. Like he's played, I think 24 or 25 games, so that's going to happen. But just to experience those moments is something Dwayne talks about. I think is good, and so I was going to lead to a win, but at the same time, what can you do, right? I mean, it's LeBron. You know LeBron's going to come to Detroit with, completely locked in, right? So
after what happened last time, you could tell that he was locked in right from the start. And LeBron is extremely petty to begin with, and so you knew he was going to come locked in. And I just want to say real quick, and then we'll start the mailbag because we had a ton of submissions, and we appreciate you guys so much for that. We love that engagement. I do like that Coach Casey has switched up his lineups. He's switched up who he finishes with. Tonight, Sadiq was shooting the ball well. Isaiah Stewart was not playing well, so he finished the game with Sadiq. We've seen him insert Jalen Duren into the starting lineup since the last time we recorded. Maybe it's not always the right decision or what the fan base wants, but you can't say that Coach Casey hasn't tried to diversify and try different things from game to game and within games, Omari.
No, you haven't. And we talked to him about that lineup change with Duren, and he brought up an interesting point that we actually haven't talked about as much, which is that, he felt that sometimes Isaiah Stewart and Marvin Bagley III kind of got wires crossed on offense. Like, do you take the dunker spot or do I take the dunker spot or kind of this and that? Because they're both, like Bagley can be effective from different areas on the floor. He's been kind of dabbling with that three as well.
Yeah.
And, he just felt that it would be easier just to have Jalen Duren. I mean, well, Dwayne didn't say this, but obviously that's their future front court. But what Dwayne did say is that, Duren is just he's always going to roll. He's always going to go into the dunker spot. He lives at the rim. And that frees Isaiah to be more of like that pure spot-up guy. He doesn't have to try to switch places with Bagley every time they go down the floor. So I actually thought that made a lot of sense. Duren's 19. He's going to have rookie mistakes. He kind of got into foul trouble tonight. But overall, that's kind of, when he makes lineup decisions, that's the stuff he's thinking about, right? It's very developmental focused. And I think starting Duren's a cloud-pleasing move anyway, so they don't really have to justify it. But I've seen Dwayne just try to maximize guys, and I think that's, something that kind of goes understated sometimes.
It's like the coaching staff has reasons and rationale for everything they do, Omari. Whether we agree with it or not, I guarantee you they've sat in on meetings and had conversations, and they have a reason. Whether we like it or agree with it or not, I guarantee you they're not just throwing darts at the board. So let's get into this, Omari. Wes, we're going to bring you in. Wes is going to introduce each of the questions. Again, thank you so much to everybody that submitted a question. Wes, get us started here for number one, and we'll get this thing rolling.
To start off, we've got two from Pistons Nation on Twitter. So the first one is, who can the Pistons acquire at the trade deadline, if anyone, that could become a team leader by next season?
Yeah, I thought that was an interesting question. I guess one, it kind of depends on what you mean by team leader, which to me is just a guy who's ready to come in and immediately kind of own the locker room. So to me, that just reads superstar. Like, I just don't see how a role player could come in and kind of immediately have that type of role from I guess if it's a veteran, like let's say you trade for PJ Tucker or whatever, like, hey, he's going to come in and have like that respect and whatnot. Yeah, I guess one, what's your take on like team leader here? Because I think, like, to me, it reads superstar, somebody who's going to be kind of command the team, but I want to make sure we're on the same page so that we can kind of tackle this question the same way.
Yeah, so I read it as someone that was going to come in and be like the leader of the team, maybe not like a superstar. So I kind of took it the other way, and I thought it was interesting in that sense. And I wonder if this person feels like Cade Cunningham isn't a team leader, if maybe he feels like we talked about a pod or two ago, Isaiah Stewart kind of becoming the soul of this team and the emotional leader. And so I wonder if there's part of the fan base, and maybe we've already forgot a little bit about Cade Cunningham because we haven't seen him play in almost a month, even though he's always shooting and warming up and shooting around at practice. And that's very interesting to all of us. But I don't know that this team needs a leader. Now, this team does need another dude, like another big-time player. So if that's what they're asking, I don't think it happens at this trade deadline, Omari. I think at the very earliest that player is acquired via trade, probably not free agency, because I don't think that guy is in free agency this offseason over the summer. So I don't see a big acquisition like that coming at the trade deadline.
No, you can never rule it out 100%, but my sense is that this team has kind of lined its chips up to make a leap next season. You look at the cap space this upcoming offseason and, just all the work they've done to kind of get this roster to where they so that this team can compete. And the Kate Cunningham injury obviously kind of changes the calculus a little bit, but still we've seen this team really kind of coming to its own over the last month, and they have been a lot more competitive. And I think you kind of look at the wins and losses, and there haven't been many gimme games at all, but they've gotten some really big wins over Utah, over Denver, over Dallas. So this team is at a spot now where I don't think you have to make a big move. You can kind of just keep everybody in. You have your young guys, and we're going to talk about this a little bit later. But overall, I don't think this is a trade deadline where people can look forward to something big happening. I don't. And also the second part of the question, is Grant Williams even remotely possible? I'm just going to say no, because I have no idea why Boston betrayed him or what the Pistons could even give up that would make it worthwhile for Boston, just given what Grant Williams gives on both ends of the floor. So if you're looking for a Grant Williams role player to come in, I think it's two things, right? It's one, who do the Pistons give up to acquire that type of guy? Because they still a future first round pick. And, I doubt that they want to give up really good draft capital, for another role player in a lost season, more than likely. And then two, what's the incentive for another team? Who on this roster is enticing enough to other teams to where you can acquire that type of guy? Obviously, Bogdanovic would, check that box, but, does a Bogdanovic Grant Williams swap accomplish anything for either team? Probably not. So, I think for a variety of reasons, this trade deadline probably doesn't quite, scratch that itch for, fans who might want a big move.
And I do think Grant Williams is a free agent this summer, but he's going to cost quite a bit. And if you acquire Grant Williams, or I know I'm jumping ahead a little bit here, I think there's a John Collins question later. I just wonder what that does to Isaiah Stewart, because I don't think Grant Williams is signing with the Pistons to come off the bench. And you're not going to trade for John Collins and bring him off the bench. So I just do have questions or wonder what that would do with the progression and the development with Isaiah Stewart at the 4. But Wes, what is the next question we have from Pistons Nation?
Like you said, also from Pistons Nation. So he asks, if the Pistons were at ground zero to start this season, where should we, the fans, expect to see the team at the start of next season? So will they actually be fit to compete?
Kind of like I alluded to earlier, I think this team kind of viewed this rebuild as ideally a 3-year process. You have 3 lotteries. Obviously you got 3 picks in 2020. You got 2 lottery picks this year. You got Kate last year. So you have a really strong core. And then more than likely you could make a 4th dip into the lottery in this year's draft, which is incredibly strong in the top 2. Falls off a little bit after that, but you still have guys like Amen Thompson and some other guys who I think have very clear star potential. And then you couple that with the cap space that they're going to have this offseason, they'll be among the league leaders. You have some really tradable contracts. You have the Bogey contract. You have the Alec Burks contract if they pick up his team option. You have a lot of pieces you can maneuver with to really bring in another star, or kind of do what the Hawks did a couple years ago, where they got Gallinari and all these good role pieces, Clint Capella, and then ended up making a postseason run. And I think Trae Young was in his 3rd season at that point. So some parallels there. But if this year was ground zero, I really do think, even with the Cade injury this year, that the way their chips are lined up, they can really make that push next year and kind of get out of the NBA basement and start to make some playoff noise.
Yeah, I'm right there with you, Omari. I think if the offseason goes the way Troy Weaver has mapped out, because here's the other thing, he may have a free agent in mind that they're actually just not able to land. He may have a trade in mind where the other team decides to go with a different deal because, they like that one better, or some other team overpays for that trade. So we don't know what could happen behind the scenes that could possibly derail this, but you outlined all of the quote unquote assets or avenues that this team has this offseason to go and be competitive next season. And that's assuming reasonable and rational progression from a Cade Cunningham, who hopefully would be healthy, Jaden Ivey, Jalen Duren, Stewart, and those guys. I think there's absolutely a path to this team being competitive for a play-in next season. And I just want to say this, because I know what fans are going to say as well. That's what we said 2 years ago. That's what we said this. We were all wrong. I was wrong. I was big time wrong 2 years ago when they drafted Cade Cunningham, and I thought they were going to make the playoffs. I look back, it's like, what the heck was I talking about? How did the Detroit Free Press decide to give me a podcast after making that prediction? But coming into this season, I had learned my lesson a little bit. And I'm not saying fans are wrong for having high expectations, but I don't think play-in was ever super reasonable for this season. We've talked about that. I think next year with the offseason that could happen, that's the first time we have reasonable expectations for them to compete that way.
And I think the bottom line for me, and I think what kind of tends to get lost when we talk about these playoff discussions, is just looking at the rest of the conference. I mean, you have a Miami Heat team that, last I checked, they're like outside of the play-in race or like just barely getting in there. They have Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo and Tyler Hero and like guys who, if the Pistons traded for them now, they would be the best player on the team. So, and they're not in the playoff race. Like the Pistons beat a Dallas team the other week that has Luka Doncic. He is the best player in the NBA, one of the best, like he's in year 4, one of the best players to ever touch a basketball. And after they lost to the Pistons, they were below 500. And it's like, if Luka Doncic can't get the Dallas Mavericks to 500, what makes you think the Pistons are going to be anywhere close to that this year? Like, it doesn't make any sense. Now. And, especially without Cade, you look at the Chicago Bulls, they have DeMar DeRozan, Zach, like they have all these guys, and they're below 500. So you see really talented teams and proven all-stars not even getting to 500. And you look at the East coming into the season, and you actually thought it was realistic that some of these teams would fall out just because the East is so talented. Then you get to the Pistons, who don't even have Cade, and it's like they're obviously going to be one of the worst teams in the NBA. Like there was no question in my mind that they would be a bottom 3 team in the East, and that's kind of how it's shaping up to be. So that's just one thing I always try to remind fans is look at the rest of the conference. If you have teams with proven all-stars not getting it done, and the Pistons have no proven all-stars, that sets their ceiling pretty low. And that's why, again, getting back to the question, I think that next year is probably realistically the first year that they could truly compete. And by compete, I mean actually be the 8th seed or better. I don't mean scrapping by and maybe getting the play-in. I mean, like actually, being above 500. I think next year they have a real chance of doing that.
And I just want to emphasize that depends on where the draft pick lands. That depends on what Troy Weaver's able to acquire in the offseason with that cap space and flexibility. But Wes, what do we got next, my friend?
Bryce, I'll ask this to you first. This is from Cedric Welton on Twitter. He asks, what teams are realistic trade partners for Bojan Bogdanovic? And is there any merit to the Pistons having interest in John Collins?
So we touched on the John Collins thing a little bit. I don't know that I'm there. Maybe I'm too high on Isaiah Stewart as a 4-man. I know Sunday night, he didn't have a great game. I've bought into the 3-point shooting. He's flashed some of the other stuff. I just think that does hurt his progression and his development playing that a little bit. As for Bojan, I wrote down a few teams, Omari. Like, I don't even know if they make sense, and I don't know what the trade is. I just went through some of the contenders. So to me, like the Warriors are needing help just having another guy, like somebody else that can score. Like, trade him to the Warriors, and the Warriors would probably bring him off the bench if Bojan would accept that. I assume he would because, he's going to be playing for a championship. Let him just be a bucket off the bench and trade some of those young guys. I put the Suns, who kind of have a hole there. And then another team is the Cleveland Cavaliers. They're really good at the guard spots with Spida and Darius Garland. They're really good up front with Jarrett Allen and Evan Mobley. But they have a hole right there at the 3 position, Omari, that I feel like, Bojan could fit right in and be really helpful for that team.
Yeah, I mean, I love the fit in Phoenix. They still, I don't know what's going on between them and Jay Crowder. I guess it's like a staring contest waiting for something to happen. But, let's get this out the way first. Every contending team in the NBA could use Bojan Bogdanovic. As far as realistic trade partners, I think, there's an argument from a need standpoint, which is that a lot of contenders could use the guy, averaging 20 points a game and better than 50% shooting, could put up 38 against the Lakers. But I think it gets into an asset discussion where it's like, how many of these teams have an asset that the Pistons would actually want to buy that? The Lakers, I just don't think a 2025 and 27 pick are going to have much interest to a Pistons team that would like to be better long before then. And the Lakers, given how they tend to rebuild, which just means going out and getting a top 10 player and keeping it going, those picks may not be that good anyway. So, it's tough for me to see the Lakers still being, done unless maybe third team comes in or there's some sort of added sweetener, like something else would kind of have to come through for that. Pelicans more likely going to have a very late first round pick. And all these teams that are good, just from an asset standpoint, don't really have a lot. The Atlanta Hawks are not a deep team at all when you look at that roster because they went all in to get better this past off season. So, from asset standpoint, what do they give up? Are they like, you could have AJ Griffin, who's been really, really good for him in the game with the shot tonight.
They're not getting rid of him right now, I don't think.
Like, they would be crazy to get rid of him. The only team that has, to me, a really good asset that I think the Pistons would be interested in is the New Orleans Pelicans, who own that Lakers pick this year. And the Lakers, if they miss the playoffs, now you have 2 lottery picks in a draft that has a 7'4" version of Kevin Durant and Scoot Henderson, who is like, if John Wall and Kyrie Irving fused together, right? So to me, I think if, the Pelicans offer that pick, maybe the Pistons are like, okay, like we like Bogey, we extended him, he's good. And whoever we get in this upcoming draft is not going to be as good as Bogey was for us this year, more than likely, unless it's a top 2 pick. And even then, it's not a guarantee. But at the very least, then you're getting into the discussion of an asset that, can help this team now and help this team later, which I think as we get deeper into this rebuild, the Pistons are probably less likely than they were a year ago or 2 years ago to make win-later moves. They're looking more at, like, let's try to get this thing going. It's just tough. Like, I think Bojan is the most desirable asset on the team, but when you get to, like, actual packages that make sense, it's like, maybe just keep the guy averaging 20 points and 50% shooting, right? Like, what asset can make up for what he's giving us right now?
All right, the next question I know dives into that a little deeper, but let's go to a quick break, and then when we come back, we'll take a question from Mark Lee about all the tradable assets on this roster.
I'm Alyssa Robinson for the Detroit Free Press. When you wake up every morning, what's the first thing you do? Check your email? Me too. And when you sign up for our daily briefing newsletter, you'll get all the latest news sent directly to your inbox so you can wake up and be ready for the day. We also have newsletters about COVID-19 in Michigan, the latest entertainment headlines, as well as Woodward 248, a newsletter specifically for people living and working in Southeast Oakland County. And don't forget about automotive headlines and all the latest news from our Michigan sports teams. We have a newsletter for every personality and preference. Just head to freep.com/newsletters to sign up for any one of these great options and more.
All right, we're back with segment 2. And Wes, how about you go ahead and another trade deadline oriented question from Mike Lee here. And I think we're going to do a lot of trade stuff today based on the questions we have in front of us.
Yeah, we did get a decent number of trade ones. So Omari, this is for you. Mark Lee, he's asking, who's most likely to be moved by the trade deadline? And how would you gauge overall support for Coach Casey at this stage of the rebuild?
Start with the second part of that, Amari.
All right. How would I gauge overall support for Coach Casey at this stage of the rebuild? Well, if we're talking about from the organizational standpoint, I still think he has good support. Like this team has competed, much more than they have at this point last year. And, I know the record's not great. They have 7 wins and they've played almost 30 games. But I think you just see the development from Killian, from Isaiah Stewart, who's shooting like 36, 37% from 3. Like Sadiq, like his outside shot hasn't fallen, but he's having his best season inside the arc by far. So I think for him, it's just getting everything to click at once and not, just certain parts of his game. But you've seen development. I think Dwayne, has good support from the front office, even still. It seems in rebuild mode. And to me, it's just hard for me to see why they would do anything drastic for a team that, I think they're comfortable, not setting the league on fire this season, just given the nature of the rebuild. So I still think Dwayne Casey has good support. Like I know, fans get tired of the losing and all that, but, I think the Pistons were aware that rebuilds take time and they're not judging them by the wins and losses. I think they've been happy with the player development so far.
I would say 100% from the organization and 10% from the fan base. That's what I put. Like, I don't think the organization has any issues right now. And I'll stick to, I think 2 years from now, he's a member of the front office. I do think Casey has some supporters in the fan base, but in general, and I had someone remind me, I think it was Vince Ellis actually reminded me this the other day. Not the entire fan base's opinion is represented by the opinions I see on Twitter. That's kind of my only interaction with the fan base is Twitter, some of the Free Press comments, some of the Detroit Bad Boy comments, but I don't live in Detroit, so I don't just meet Pistons fans walking down the street and get a chance to talk to them. So there may be more support from the fan base than what I'm thinking. As for the first part of the question, I'll just say this real quick, Amari. I think Noel is definitely off this team by the trade deadline. And then I'm curious what they end up doing with Hami, who seems to have fallen out of the rotation, even with Isaiah Livers not playing because of the play of Kevin Knox. And then I think we probably see Burks and Boyan carried over into the offseason.
I mean, there's always a chance that, a deal you don't expect comes through. And I think, you probably have to part with at least one of Bogey or Burks if it's a worthwhile deal, just because of the way they've played and the nature of their contracts. Yeah, Nerlens, I think he's probably not a big, if you just look at the way the season's kind of gone, where you see that, he's been more of a backup option, for, Duran. And, I think the way Dwayne Case kind of talks about the emergency glass, it wouldn't shock me if he's not on the team by the time we get to March. Like, I'll just say that, I think that's probably toward the top of the list. Hami's interesting to me, because I guess for me, I kind of wonder from an asset standpoint, like, what could you get for him? He's a very high energy, wing / forward, and, his athleticism is great. But the bottom line is that, he's not a great shooter, and the defense kind of comes and goes. So, I kind of wonder, do you get a second? Like, kind of what's the, package that kind of makes sense, for Hami, especially when he's a guy who, when given the opportunity, he has to come in and really produce for this team, right? So let me get back to the question. Who's most likely to be moved at the trade deadline? Like, I would say, it wouldn't shock me if Nerlens is moved. It would not shock me if one of the vets, whether it's Boyan or, Alec Burks or even Marvin Bagley's moved. But my honest answer is that I don't think it's super highly likely that anybody's moved. Like, it wouldn't shock me. This is a pretty quiet trade deadline. So, I don't want to say anything that gives people the impression that these guys are out the door, because I don't necessarily feel that way.
Yeah, I would say Nerlens Noel maybe nets a second rounder. This whole situation is weird to me. Like, Nerlens doesn't seem to really care too much about playing for the Pistons. And to me, the Pistons don't care too much about Nerlens playing for them. Like, that's just my outside perspective. And then I'm going to say Hami for like a young player who's been struggling through his career but still has some upside. So that's where I'm at. Alec Burks and Boyan carry over into the offseason. And Wes, it looks like we have yet another trade question from Jeff Koenig.
Yes, we do, Bryce. I'll ask it to you. It's from Jeff, like he said. He asks, if we make a trade this season, which is more likely? Troy initiating the call or another team calling Troy Weaver?
So I think Troy will actively seek to trade Nerlens Noel and possibly Hamidou Diallo. I do think Troy is going to get calls on Burks and Boyan. If other teams aren't calling about Burks and especially Boyan, they're crazy. As you said, Omari, like, what contender couldn't use really either one of these guys? Burks has been a bucket off the bench. Was he like fifth in the NBA in bench scoring or something like that? And so I think both of those guys, and I could see teams calling in about the 2020 guys and seeing what's up with Killian, Stu, Bay. I'm not saying Troy's going to take any of those super serious, but I could see teams, trying to figure out what's going on with those guys.
I'm going to go another GM, and that's not to say that the Pistons won't be making calls. And I mean, it's Troy Weaver. Like, we know he operates. He's always going to look for avenues to either balance the roster out or, kind of like make this team better. I'm saying another GM because unlike last year where the Pistons very clearly needed an athletic big, I don't think this roster has the same glaring deficiencies. And I don't think the Pistons are in a boat where there's just like these pressing needs they need to address at the trade deadline. Like, I think they're in a spot now where, you have your guys in place, like all the veterans are on the contract for next season for the most part. Like, you can just kind of hold steady and, then make some big moves next offseason if you want. So, I think the Pistons have a lot of guys who have, interests across the league, and, they've been answering phones as they always do. And I'm going with another GM just because, if there is a more sizable trade that happens, I think it would be because the Pistons were offered something that they cannot say no to.
All right, Wes, are we changing gears here, or do we have some more trade questions?
We are changing some gears. This is from Casey Thomas. I wanted to ask this one to you, Bryce, first. So he says, 1/3 of the way into the season, and Duren is already the closing big defender with Isaiah Stewart. So he wants to know, what do you see as a coach for their best fit together on both ends of the floor.
It's interesting you asked this because I was listening to a podcast the other day talking about the Celtics and how they'll use Robert Williams at times, which is they actually take Robert Williams and they put him like on a wing non-shooter. So like tonight when the Pistons were playing the Lakers, you take Jalen Duren and you put him on Russell Westbrook. And what that allows Duren to do is just roam and be a shot blocker and a weak side rim protector. And what I like about that defensively, where Duren is still struggling defending ball screens, he just hasn't got the fundamentals of it yet. Now Isaiah Stewart's still in ball screens. You can switch him, which we know he's good at that. He's not nearly as good at drop, but you could still drop with him, especially if Jalen Duren's waiting in the lane to help. So that's kind of, I like that idea. Now every team, like the Lakers put a lineup out there tonight that had LeBron and 4 shooters. So that takes that off the table just a little bit. But ultimately, if you could do that, I like that. Offensively, Amari, you talked about this earlier. The nice thing about Stu and Duren together is Duren knows screen and roll, screen and get to the dunker spot, and Isaiah Stewart's going to stay out at the 3-point line. So I think offensively, they already have it pretty well figured out what each of their roles is going to be.
I think defensively, ideally, you want Duren as like purely the drop big. Like we kind of talk about his upside as a switch guy, but at the end of the day, there just aren't too many 7-foot guys who are defending guards well. Maybe Duren gets there, maybe not, but I think that's why you have Isaiah, because you feel better with him on the perimeter. He's a big body who can handle some of the bigger, 4s, bigger 3s, like certain guards. Like that's more his job, and then you could just allow Duren to kind of prowl the rim. And if you need to play small, then you could just bench Duren, and then you can allow Isaiah to play the 5, and he can prowl around or do whatever you need to do. Like that 4 out, line up with the Bron. Probably not a great fit for Duren defensively, so you just want Isaiah out there. But I think long term, you just get a lot of malleability on defense. Like we've seen other teams kind of have that. Like you even see the Cavaliers, like you have Jared Allen as more of the, rim protecting 5, and then you kind of trust Mobley to handle the more mobile assignments along the perimeter, which he does pretty well, and the Pistons can mimic that pretty closely. And then as we talked about earlier, offensively, Isaiah Stewart's probably more of a pure stretch 4 when Duren is on the floor, and that allows Duren to do what he's good at, which is pick and roll, catch lobs, dunker spot, all that. Yeah, I think it's a pretty good fit. If you're going to play 2 bigs, I think long term they fit each other pretty well.
All right, Wes, it looks like we have some Killian Hayes questions or maybe one Killian Hayes question from multiple people.
I think everybody might have wanted to ask this to you guys. So, Mario, I'll ask you first, because this is from Matthew Crow, data-driven Pistons fan, and I loved the username. It was Maggio, which I can only assume is a reference to Pistons legend Corey Maggette. So he asks, if Killian keeps this up, do you see any possibility of him starting next to Cade over Ivy? And then he says he thinks he's best with the ball in his hands, so he might prefer to run backup point guard.
Cool. So I also answered this question in my mailbag, which I believe ran in print Sunday, and we'll go online Monday. So, this is the podcast version of what I wrote in the mailbag. I think if Killian keeps it up, that he deserves to start because he's just been really good. Like he shot the 3 really well. He's been good from mid-range. Passing has been even better than usual, and it's always pretty good. And then the defense has been consistent as well. So, I think he's just a guy that really raises your floor. And it just makes sense. To me, it makes sense to start him, if he's still playing as well, just because you want your best 5 on the floor. But so I think it's possible for sure, like 100%. I think the other side of that is, maybe it's correlation, maybe it's causation. That's a debate that we could have. But Jaden Ivey played a lot better when he was next to Cade. He was better at the rim. He was better from 3. Like everything was better when Cade was in the lineup, and everything has declined since Cade got hurt. So I think the second part of that is if Killian can continue to thrive separate from Cade, you let him run the second unit, and if he's playing well, then you close the game with Killian. Do you continue to allow Jaden to start with Cade because it takes pressure off of Jaden to be sort of like that primary focal point, and it's better for his development long term? So if it's just like a pure talent question, then yeah, Killian starts. If it's more of a playing guys where they fit best, and maybe Killian comes off the bench when Cade gets back, just so that Killian can kind of run the offense on his own.
I'm not going to ask you to respond to this, but I don't think Jaden Ivey would take very well to coming off the bench. That's just my opinion. I don't think he would respond very well to that. Who do you think would thrive more coming off the bench? Because when I read this question, I didn't like it initially, but there would be something to letting Jaden Ivey just feast on second units similar to what we've seen from Marvin Bagley III over the last couple games with him coming off the bench. And we've talked about Benedict Mathurin in Indiana, a guy we both liked. And I think he's the leading scorer off the bench this year, not just rookies, of anybody in the NBA. He's in the running for Rookie of the Year and Sixth Man of the Year. There could be something to be said for letting Jaden Ivey just terrorize second units that way, and that Killian may be more of a stabilizing factor in the starting lineup and closing lineup with Cade Cunningham. Do you think that may be better for Jaden Ivey?
I think it could be. I mean, yeah, you let them go against second units. You're probably not going against as strong rim protectors. So, things come a little bit easier at the rim. And once you get into the rim and finishing up the rim, everything else opens up for them. And even if it's just temporary, like coming off the bench could probably just get him maybe the rhythm he needs to kind of break out of this slump. So I think there's arguments either way. I think bottom line, like, if Killian's playing better and you're trying to win, then you probably just put him in the starting lineup until, Ivy proves that he can consistently play better. But even with that, Ivy's, I think he has the talent, to be a primary guy. And if you bring him off the bench, let him get comfortable, then I think there's upside in that. At the end of the day, he's a rookie. Ben Math's been coming off the bench all season. He's been fantastic in that role. I can't say, for certain whether Ivy would take to it or not, but the reality is that he's a rookie and he's been struggling, and, rookies who struggle typically come off the bench. So I think there's arguments either way, honestly, but if you're just going off of who's been playing better, then yeah, I think Killian starts next to Cade.
What about the three of them together? Because I know that that's something people talk a lot about. I would be interested for Cade to come back just to see if that's something that Dwayne, he probably wouldn't do it, right? Because you're not going to take Boyan out of the starting lineup. But do you think in general, those three guys could play together and thrive together a little bit?
I don't know. I think they're all kind of best with the ball in their hands. I think Ivy, maybe as an off-ball cutter brings you something that can help it work. And, Killian being pretty good at catch and shooting, like that could work. Cade at the three would be interesting. I think he can play the three. The offense will still run through him, obviously. So whether he's whatever he's playing, the offense is going to run through him. So that doesn't really matter. I don't know. It's kind of tough just because Cade got hurt. So I think you're kind of projecting some things that we just haven't seen. And we've seen those three play very limited minutes together, kind of through preseason and through those first 12 games or so. I think on paper they have things that could work, but I think you're giving some stuff up as well. Like, it's probably just better to have two of those guys and then try to get a shooter in, pure shooter in for that third spot.
Yeah, I think it still comes down to what you see Cade Cunningham's archetype of player really being. Is it with the ball in his hands? Is it a little bit more of an off-ball scorer and those type of things? And so, Wes, what do we have next?
Yeah, so this was an interesting one from Darius Harris. Wanted to ask this one to you first, Bryce. So he wants to know, what is Casey's mark on the teams he coaches? So he brings up Pop and Tibbs and how they're more defensive coaches, but really he's looking for something that you could say is kind of Dwayne Casey's staple on teams that he coaches.
Yeah, so one thing I want to say from anybody I've talked to, and I've been around Dwayne Casey, I haven't ever actually got to speak to him. Like, we've acknowledged each other. He has no idea who I am. Like, I'm not trying to say that, but, I've been in media. I've walked by him on the court, pregame, stuff like that. And the people I've talked to, including David Aldridge, like, all they talk about is how well respected Dwayne Casey is around the league by everybody, other coaches, players, everybody. You can just tell that he is an extremely respected coach in the NBA. I would say what I feel like is it's about the player development, which we've talked about, but it's about that development on and off the court and teaching these young players how to be professionals. And I've said, even if we're giving up something X's and O's wise from Dwayne Casey, which I could critique that offensively and being more creative and this and that and some of the rotation stuff and not going offense, defense at the end of the game on Sunday night. At the end of the day, I'll trade all of that stuff if he's developing these young guys into pros. If he's teaching Jalen Duren how to be a pro, Isaiah Stewart how to be a pro, it's coming around for Killian Hayes. So at the end of the day, I feel like that's what his lasting legacy is not the right word, but imprint will be on this Pistons team, is turning these young guys into professionals.
Yeah, in addition to just how well respected he is across the league, I think two things, you always hear two things about Dwayne. One, his teams always play really hard. And two, his teams are always very well prepared. Now, I know some people are hearing that and they're like, the Pistons are, 7 and whatever. So, what does that count for? But the Pistons do play hard. I think we've seen them really, compete. Like, they've gotten comfortable over the last month and they've been in almost every single game. I think they've had only a handful of double-digit losses, and really off the top of my head, I can only think of 2 games they just truly had not been in. We saw the Memphis build a pretty big lead early last week, and the Pistons came back from it. I think we've seen that, honestly. Like, his teams are usually pretty well prepared, and they usually compete pretty hard. And, I think that, along with the third thing, which is player development. People always talk about how good he is with young players and how he coaches them up and gets them ready to play. We saw that in Toronto, obviously, getting them to where they needed to go. Those 3 things really stick out, and I think it speaks to why the Pistons were, even through the front office change, they were pretty confident having Dwayne Casey still lead their ship.
I think that tells you everything you need to know. The fact that they did have a front office change and Troy Weaver has stayed with Dwayne Casey through the losing and the restoration and everything. Obviously, that's pretty impressive because we know that it's easy for a GM to get rid of a coach that isn't quote unquote his guy. So the fact Dwayne Casey's still around through all of this, I think speaks a lot to who he is and what he is and how he does things. So let's go to a short break here. And then Wes, when we come back, we got a few more Pistons questions. And then I know we got a couple fun ones for the end.
All right, hey, Carlos, just a quick idea. How about if I say, hey, this is Sean Windsor, and you say, hey, this is Carlos Morales, and I'll go, and then we'll go back. You want to try that?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay, you ready?
Yep.
Hey, this is Sean Windsor.
And this is Carlos Menarez.
And we are the team behind Free Press Sports with Carlos and Sean, where we are going to talk about, you guessed it, sports, but lots of other stuff. Like what, Carlos?
Oh, we're going to talk about your favorite subject, Sean, food. Probably more food. Arts, culture, sports, TV, movies, you name it. If it's happened in Detroit, we're going to talk about it.
And sometimes we're going to have guests in who obviously know a lot more than we do about just about everything. But we're going to have some free press journalists to talk about big stories, folks from the sports world. We're going to be out every Thursday. You can find this podcast wherever you find your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts. We hope you'll join us.
All right, we are back with segment 3, and we're getting into some more player development stuff here. So take us away, Wes.
Omari, this one is from Jamel Brinkley, asking just kind of any insight into Jaden Ivey's recent struggles, his mindset, his relationship with Casey. And then we did have a follow-up from ETS Craftery on Twitter as well, just kind of more general thoughts about his development to date.
I mean, I think his recent struggles, I think a lot of it boils down to shot selection, honestly. I think he kind of picks bad times to drive to the rim. A lot of his threes, even if they go in sometime, I think are they're either too long or just too early in the clock. He could probably get a better shot. And he is just very much kind of going through the NBA is a lot different from college. Like a lot of stuff I got away with from college, I absolutely cannot get away with. I will get my shot swatted. I will airball. It's just, he's kind of going through that right now. I think he's a confident guy. He has a good relationship with Dwayne. Obviously, they're committed to developing him and giving him a chance to kind of play through this as they did with Cade and through Killian. He's 5th overall pick. They're going to give him a very long leash and allow him to make those mistakes. And, maybe if this continues, another month or so, maybe you start to get into some deeper questions then. But, he has full support from the staff. He has full support from Dwayne. And honestly, even just, from the convos me and Bryce had before the season, I think a lot of what he's struggling with now is stuff that we kind of predicted, honestly. I don't think any of this is really that surprising. There's a reason why he was a top 4 prospect, but almost universally 4, instead of sort of in that top 3, because he just had some basketball stuff he had to work on. And, quite simply, even if it has to do with Cade or not, I just think teams know what he's good at, what he's bad at, and he's been playing to his weaknesses more than his strengths. So, Bryce, I think you agree with a lot of that, but curious to hear what you think.
No, 100%. I wrote down the word settling. I think he's settling for threes right now. Like you said, early in the clock. There was one tonight where he had Anthony Davis switched onto him, and Anthony Davis was backed way up, and Jaden Ivey backed up to half court, and it was one of those where you wanted to see him just attack him downhill and I don't even care if Anthony Davis blocks him. I didn't want to see Jaden Ivey settle for a 3 in that situation. I think this is also a possibility of him getting worn down a little bit. You talked about this, Amari. I think sometimes we just say, oh, he's settling. Well, he's probably tired mentally and physically and emotionally. And when you get tired, you settle for easier shot attempts where usually for him are just going to be walk into threes. I want to say this, what have I been around? 2 games? He's an ultra competitive young man. I've seen him after wins and losses, and the body language I saw post game, you could tell how competitive that young man was. And I'm saying in a good way, just super, super competitive. The game in Detroit where he got brought into the media room after the game, you could tell he was just ultra frustrated. And so I think he's going to continue to work and get better. And a lot of rookies are struggling right now. Ben Math is going through a little bit of a struggle time. Shaden Sharp, who's been great in Portland, has been struggling. Keegan Murray's been up and down. Like, they're all going to go through it. And I would just, if I could.
Jabari Smith, too. Sorry to cut you off, but he's been struggling, too. So,
yeah, it's across the board. If I could suggest one thing to Jaden, it'd be, keep getting downhill, like keep being aggressive to the rim. Don't settle for those shot attempts. That would be the biggest thing for me.
Yeah, his game is predicated on aggression. And when he settles for threes, like that's what the defense wants. He has never really been a strong shooter. They're not going to tell him to stop shooting threes, but yeah, he needs to get downhill. Like he's got one of the best first steps in the NBA. He needs to have confidence in that. I think one thing that would help him a lot is like play for the foul sometimes more than for the layup.
Yeah, I love it.
Like I think a lot of guys like get downhill, they know that they're going to get swatted sometimes. Like, most teams have at least one good rim protector now. So play for contact, like that play you were talking about earlier. Yeah, AD's lurking, right? All right, so get into his body, don't just go for the layup, get into his body and try to make him foul you. Like that should be one of his best skills, just getting the opposing big into foul trouble. And, there's other ways he can leverage his athleticism that we're not seeing him do yet. I think he's been pretty one-track minded. So that's just sort of the progressions of the NBA and just stuff you have to figure out as it goes on.
Yeah, and I'll just continue to emphasize, I think the mid-range is the biggest area of growth for him. I did an article here recently to plug some of my own stuff, but I think that's a huge area for growth for him. So, Wes, what do we got next?
We got a quick hitter here for you, Bryce, first from Big Smooth. He just simply asks, will Killian be a Piston next season?
Yes, and the funny thing is, 1 month ago, it would have been a hard no. So I think Killian Hayes is on this team next season.
I think so, too. I think the avenues where he's not is like either you include him in like a pretty big trade because you could get a star over that summer and you got to give up a young guy to get it done. And you're just like, we have Ivy, we have Cade, like this is what we need to do. Or two, you get the second overall pick and you have Scoot, and then it's like, well, we can't have 4 ball handlers, so we got to part ways with one of them. And I'm not saying Killian would definitely be that guy, but I'm saying it opens the door for, somebody to get traded. But beyond that, I mean, Killian either gets extended this offseason or like, this fall, whenever they want to get it done, or they bring him into restricted free agency and, and then next summer you kind of figure it out. Or the summer after next, not 2024 summer. But either way, it would just take a very worthwhile trade, I think, for Killian to not be here. Like, otherwise, I think you try to lock him into a reasonable deal and just keep him here for long term.
It is crazy how quick some of these decisions are coming up for those 2020 draft picks.
I mean, again, you kind of get into next season kind of being the season where they make some sort of leap. Man, it's like, well, you hope, because Isaiah Stewart, Sadiq, and Killian are going to be making a lot more money, so you hope that they're playing well enough to win you some games, right? If you don't want to pay them, then that means you missed your picks. So, like this roster is going to get a lot more pricey over the next couple of years for sure.
Good transition for this next one, Omari. So this is from Fueled by Motown. He says, put yourself in Troy Weaver's chair with the impending extensions for Killian, Stu, and Sadiq. What do you do with each guy? And if you do decide to pay them, how much?
I would get Killian. Like, I would try to get Killian to like a 4-year. Like, if I could get him to like $10 million a year, I feel fantastic. And that is, if he continues the way he's been playing now, maybe that's a little bit of an underpay.
Agreed.
And if I'm Killian, maybe I'm just going to go into restricted free agency and try to fetch a bigger contract. Which, if you're being offered $10 million, maybe that makes more sense. But for me, I want to get Killian for less than, I think my absolute max is like 13. And if he continues playing like this, then the price goes up, right? But I think that, for a guy who probably projects as like a borderline starter, like maybe bench, but like definitely a high level guard, I'm actually going to look up how much Tyus Jones got paid this offseason, because I think Killian could be in like that Tyus Jones tier of like, if he starts 40 games for you a year, you feel all right. If he's like your bench guard, you feel fantastic. And I'm just going to Google this real quick. He signed a 2-year, $29 million deal. So that's like a tick under $15 million. I think if you get, you get Killian for like 13, I think you feel pretty fantastic about that. Isaiah Stewart, I'm like 15, 16, just what he brings defensively and knocking out threes. And then Sadiq, I think Keldon Johnson signed for like 18 or 19, but Keldon Johnson's also shot the ball a lot better than Sadiq has. So I think that would probably bump Sadiq down to like maybe that same Isaiah range. Like, you know, you get him for like 16, you probably feel pretty good.
So, yeah, I mean, one, Tyus Jones is one of the best backup point guards in the league, and Killian hasn't proven to be that yet, even though we think he could be that if he continues to play the way he has, not necessarily on Sunday, but in general how he's played over the last month. The other thing is, and I know the question, I believe, asked about this, you do have the salary cap jump. And by the time these extensions kicking in, that will be part of this. So what'd you say Tyus got right around 15?
He got 2 years, 29, so like 14 and a half a year.
So like to me, that probably means Killian's going to get 15, considering Killian's not Tyus Jones, but the salary cap is going to be significantly more than what Tyus Jones signed for. I think
Killian's also a lot younger, so he presumably has upside that Tyus Jones does not have. So
like I think there's $20 million a year talk around Grant Williams. Well, like, so Isaiah Stewart, like, is he in that ballpark? You brought up Keldon Johnson, but again, Sadiq's contract's going to go into the new CBA. Like, we have to I need to dive more into the new CBA and what those salary cap numbers are actually going to look like, because I think some guys are going to get $20 million a year that we're all like, what? How is that even possible? And it's just going to make sense under the new CBA. So I think under 20 for all these guys would be incredible. But I wouldn't be surprised, especially if it becomes 40% from three or something like that, or Sadiq gets back up into the upper 30% from three, if one of those guys ends up hitting 20 a year.
And that's the thing. I'm speaking from like a GM or like my ideal contracts for these guys, you know, and I'm also like not a big spending person in general. So, you know, so maybe that's a tad conservative, but you make a good point about, you know, the you know, just the salaries just going up every year. You know, like you have a new TV deal, you know, coming like not too soon from now. So, you know, I'm thinking like, you know, like pre-inflation, right? Like we're about to have some inflation soon, and like, you know, 13 in a few years is not going to be 13. It's going to be like, you know, like 8 or 9, basically. So, yeah, I mean, maybe just add $2 million to everything I said, and it feels like a little bit more realistic for what the guys will actually get. But I'm thinking more from like, I want these contracts to be good deals. You know, I don't want to be stuck paying a player and you're still kind of gambling on their upside a little bit more. But no, because I even remember like Jaylen Brown, like before he had even really, you know, become what he was now, the Celtics signed him to like a really, really big deal. Like, I don't know if it was a max deal, but it was like pretty high up there. And everybody's like, Jaylen Brown hasn't done anything. Like, why would you do that? And then 2 years later, he's almost as good as Jason Tatum. And it's like, okay, that's actually a really good contract for him. So, you know, I think some of that just kind of comes down to being able to accurately project, you know, where a player will become. Now, Isaiah Stewart, like you mentioned, Grant Williams, you're talking about 20 a year for him. But what Grant Williams gives you in the playoffs is so valuable that adds a little bit more to it, you know, because he is a guy that's playing super heavy minutes in the playoffs because of what he gives you defensively and also the shooting. And I think Isaiah Stewart would be able to give you a lot of that. You know, so I say 15. Realistically, if Isaiah Stewart is shooting 37% in the playoffs and he's, you know, your best all-around defender, he's way better than $15 million a year player, especially when you're talking about 2025 money. So that goes up. So, you know, what I'm learning from this is that I'm a cheap GM and I probably lose my young guys. But at $2 to $3 million to each of those guys, that's probably a little bit more of a realistic ballpark for this upcoming offseason.
If you and I were GMs together, we would be so far under the salary cap every year. We'd be the cheapest GMs in the history, because I'm the same way.
$10 million? What? No, that's crazy. Like, what? No, I'm not doing that. Yeah, like that would be every.
Cade hasn't even made an all-star game yet. We ain't giving him more than 10 million. I mean, here's the thing.
Well,
some of these dudes are getting $60 million a year. Go look at some of the recently signed max deals. They're $60 million a year at the end of those contracts, Amari. So you think about that, and dudes are going to be making $20 million coming off the bench regularly in the NBA moving forward. So I got to wrap my head around it.
Yeah, you know, it's a lot of money, but I think, like you said earlier, if you get all those guys for like less than 20 a year, you probably feel pretty good. But, you know, again, you kind of face the risk of like lowballing them, and then they're like, well, I'm just going to go into restricted free agency. And then Sadiq averages like 19 a game with good efficiency, and now he's a max guy, right? So, you know, yeah, like you're probably, like as of now, none of these guys are max guys, but you probably want to pay them maybe a healthy percentage lower than that, just so that they're taken care of once they're 25 and actually performing at the level you want. And then And now it's a good contract, but you kind of have to overpay early until they get to that point. If you look at the way these contracts usually play out.
Yeah, a lot of important decisions coming up for Troy Weaver. Let's just say that. So, Wes, we got one more Pistons one and then a couple fun ones. I know one still involves basketball.
We do. And so this one's going to go to you first, Bryce, because it's right up your alley. And I'm going to read the name. I'm sorry. I Google translated it. It says Lear Latchkich. I'm sorry. But they ask, with a healthy Cade, a second-year Ivy, and an improving Killian, is Scoot Henderson the pick if the Pistons land number 2? He is the consensus number 2, but that would be 4 guards drafted in the Troy Weaver era. I know you draft based on talent.
Yes,
right?
yes. You draft Scoot Henderson because there is a tier break. First it's Victor, then it's Scoot, then there's another tier. Now, I will say this. Wes has talked me into entertaining some trades, but I want a king's ransom if I'm going to trade out in number 2. And I'm going to quickly throw out a few names that fit perfectly into the Pistons roster. Number 1 on the Pistons fit board for all of you fans should be Cam Whitmore out of Villanova, just recently started playing and is tearing it up. Asar Thompson, the other twin, and you could throw a Min in there as well, even though he's a little more ball dominant. And then Brandon Miller, who's really exploded onto the scene at Alabama. Those are the fits, especially if Detroit falls out of the top 2.
Yeah, you take Scoot Henderson, and I would not trade Scoot. Like, there's nobody underneath that Scoot tier that interests me enough to trade Scoot. Like I said, you watch Scoot play from the dude he's doing at 18 years old in the G League, tougher competition in college. Just his athleticism, just his feel for the game, his ball handling. Just everything. Like I said, like imagine prime John Wall. Now imagine that prime John Wall was a pretty good shooter. And he was a good ball handler. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying he wasn't a good ball handler, but he's a Kyrie Irving ball handler. Like, he's not just above average. He's like generationally great. And you're talking about a guy who's going to run the NBA for a long time. If Victor were in this draft, Scoot would be the number 1 pick, and it really wouldn't even be that much of a debate. And the fact that Victor is just
generational,
we've never seen before, says a lot about just how good Scoot is. So, I think when you are building a team, you always have to draft for talent, always, because the superstar talent you draft will make or break that rebuild. You don't draft for fit. You don't pass on a generational guy because you already drafted guys that play that same position. Of course, Cade Cunningham could become a superstar, but he hasn't gotten there yet. Ivy could become one, but he hasn't gotten there yet. So, you don't pass on another positional superstar because you're hoping that the guys who haven't proven it eventually prove it. You take, the guy who has the most potential of all those guys, which is Scoot, and then you figure things out from there. Maybe you'd have to part ways with one to Killian, Cade, or Ivy if you get to that point, but that's just what you got to do. I'm sure there are no Golden State fans who, regret that Golden State
traded Monte Ellis
Curry over like Monte Ellis, right? Like Monte Ellis was the guy, like he was good. He had star potential, but at the end of the day, Steph was Steph, and he was a draft pick that made the most sense for the future. And they have 4 championships to show for it. So I think these are decisions that seem really hard in the moment, but then you think 5-10 years in the future, and it's actually a pretty easy decision. You take the guy with the most potential, and then you keep it rolling from there.
So Killian Hayes was drafted number 7 in a draft that Scoot Henderson would have went number 1. Jaden Ivey was drafted number 5 in a draft that Scoot Henderson would have went number 1. That's all anybody needs to know. That's the kind of prospect that Scoot Henderson is, and that's why you don't pass on him. Literally the only reason he's not the number 1 pick in this draft is because Victor is truly generational. And we throw around generational all the time. Cade Cunningham was really good, but he shouldn't have been like generational label. That's reserved for Giannis and LeBron and those type of. He is 7'5" and is banging threes, and he plays like a wing. So Scoot is the real deal. Now, maybe it changes. Maybe I end up being wrong, but that's how I feel about him right now. And I don't think there's any way you pass on that kid.
Yeah, I think we're in complete lockstep. The Pistons should not be worried about fit in any general at all, period. Like, I know people are also going to be like, how do you take Wemby when you already have Duran and Isaiah Stewart? And it's like, because he's Wemby and you take him, you figure everything else out later. So, yeah, I just hope we can. I don't want to have to keep answering, like, should it take Scoot or Victor questions? Like, the answer is yes. I don't care. I don't care I don't care who the other player is. There is no scenario where the answer to that question will be no. It will always be yes. So let's just settle that right now. Yes, you take Victor. Yes, you take Scoot. There's no debate.
Barring a Victor injury or a Scoot complete fall off over the next 2 months in the G League, our answer is not changing. But
yeah, we're talking about the versions of them on December 11th, 2022.
There we go. All right, Wes, I know we got a fun one coming up, and I get a chance to show off my movie knowledge being greater than Omari Sankofa II.
Yeah, I'm going to get crushed on this one.
Well, since you're prepared, you go first. This is from Aaron on Twitter. He says, create your best fictional starting five from non-basketball players.
Okay, first, Aaron, I love you for this question, and I love all of our listeners, and I appreciate all of you, and I love all the questions we've ever been asked, but this was my favorite one by far, and I took it very serious. So at point guard, I'm starting from White Men Can't Jump, Sidney Dean. Okay, I know he's a little selfish, but I'm going to coach him up. I'm going to get him to distribute the basketball. Hold on, Omari. As shooting guard, this is a little unfair, so I have two guys. One is Jimmy Chitwood from the movie Hoosiers. Now, you could say this isn't fair because that is actually based on a true story, even though Jimmy Chitwood is not the person's real name. But I grew up wanting to be Jimmy Chitwood because I'm from a little town in Nowhere, Kansas, and that movie is based on a little town in Nowhere, Indiana. If you say that doesn't count, then I will ignite the White Men Can't Jump backcourt and put Billy Hoyle along with Sidney Dean in the backcourt. At small forward, I have Thomas Shepard from Above the Rim. If you don't know Omari, that's the guy that plays in the park without the basketball. Have you seen the movie?
So here's the thing. No, Bryce, go ahead. I would just let you cook. I'm going to let you cook.
Thomas Shepard. At power forward, I figured this one out later because you can't use the blue chips guys, right? Because Shaq plays Neon Bodo and Penny Hardaway plays the point guard. But Ricky Rowe is not played by an NBA player. So I will take Ricky Rowe from the movie Blue Chips at power forward. He got recruited by giving his dad a tractor, which also hits home with me. Not that American University gave my dad a tractor. I wasn't good enough. And then this is the one I'm really proud of. I will take Saleh from The Air Up There, which if you guys haven't seen the movie, it's the 90s Kenya version of the new Adam Sandler movie, Hustle. I see Omari looking movie. Hey, The Air Up There is a good movie. Saleh was a dude, though. And so that is my starting five.
All right, I'm just going to go with the Monstars from Looney Tunes. We're talking about, some 8 feet, 400-pound aliens who took talent from the best basketball players of that era. They took talent from Charles Barkley, Bugsy Bogues.
Time out. The question says non-basketball players.
Right, they're not basketball players. They're aliens from outer space. But they took talent. They took talent from actual basketball players, but they're fictional. They're not basketball players.
They lost also. They lost to Bugs
because
Bunny.
Michael Jordan.
They lost to Bugs Bunny.
They lost to Michael Jordan, and I couldn't take the Toon Squad because they have Michael Jordan, even though that was a fictional Michael Jordan who could extend his limbs like Mr. Incredible. So I wasn't going to take them. That was a down to the wire game that came down to a game-winning shot, and the Monstars gave Michael Jordan everything he can handle. And the Toon Squad also, Daffy Duck could not hoop at all. It just drags the overall team down. I'm just going with the Monstars. I just don't see how you could top aliens who are built. They're all built like Wemby, and they all took talent from the best basketball players of the 90s except Jordan. You can't top that. I'm just taking the Monstars. That's my answer. I just don't see how anybody else could compete with that.
Anyway, if you guys haven't watched Blue Chips, go watch Blue Chips. That's a great movie, and it's kind of funny because now in today's NIL deals and stuff like that, it's really interesting. But my starting five wins perfect. I think that should add a point to my Sheet or Sham score, which would make it now. Wes says no. Okay, we got one more question, Wes. I want to talk about this one also because we like to talk about food on the pod.
So this is the last one. So he sneaks. This is Trey Moffitt, but he sneaks a little basketball in there. He says, should we trade for Cam Reddish? But then at the end of it, I think the real question, name the top 3 ice cream flavors.
So, Trey, you're my guy. I appreciate all your support of the pod and Motor City Hoops on Twitter and all that stuff. When I read this, I was like, Cam Reddish in 3 ice cream flavors? What is he talking about? I read it very not intelligently whenever I did that. I'm going to overlook the Cam Reddish part. I just want to talk about ice cream, Omari. So, number 1, chocolate chip cookie dough. Number 2, cookies and cream. And then I literally had to look at my wife and go, babe, what is like another one of my favorite ice cream flavors? And she's like, I don't know. You always just get banana split. So I'm going to put banana split for my 3rd ice cream flavor.
All right, cool. Well, we're united at number 1. Chocolate chip cookie dough is the number 1 ice cream flavor. I can't really, like, if I could only eat one flavor of ice cream the rest of my life, it'd be chocolate chip cookie dough. Like, not even really a debate there. Number 2, like you said, cookies and cream. I was going to go like mint chocolate, but like I'm going to switch it up a little bit. And I am going to go coffee. I like coffee ice cream. Coffee ice cream is good.
That's only 2.
I know. Well, your face, it looked like you had a retort, so I was giving you room to reply, but I'm just keep going here. All right. Okay, so chocolate chip cookie dough, coffee. I don't even know what my number 3 is. I feel like at that point, it's just like the field. There's a pretty big, like I could go brownie ice cream, but along the same lines of cookie dough and mint. I would say just like straight chocolate ice cream. I like chocolate, but it's just a little too like sweet for me. Like I don't like things that are just like insanely sweet. So I would honestly just go like plain vanilla for the 3rd one. Like if you get like a really high quality vanilla ice cream, it's really good. Like I know people see vanilla as like boring or plain or whatever, but you get a good like Ben & Jerry's vanilla ice cream. Like that
is like literally the context around vanilla, right? Like vanilla literally means plain and boring and...
No, it doesn't. It just means vanilla. Vanilla's a flavor. Like it has become that because people put vanilla into that box, but that's because they don't eat good vanilla. Like vanilla in and of itself is a good flavor. Plain would just be like milk. Like you're not even adding vanilla beans. It's just, you just turn the milk into ice cream and it just tastes like milk. Milk does not taste like vanilla. Milk tastes like milk. Vanilla's vanilla. They're 2 different things.
I'm so confused. What is your go-to ice cream container?
Container? What do you mean?
Cone, waffle cone, cup.
I like just having it in a cup because cones are sloppy and it's a hot summer day and the ice cream's dripping down your hand and it's just a big mess. So I just like a nice contained bowl or cup where I can just get a spoon and like scoop it out.
That's a very vanilla answer from you, Amari. I will take a waffle cone because it adds a little bit of crunch with the softness of the ice cream, and you got to have the texture. And, I assumed I would get that kind of answer from you.
Yeah, but, you also look like you're 6 years old when you have an ice cream cone in your hand, which you have to consider. So I just like having a bowl. I don't like having ice cream on my hands. Like, you have to have a napkin. Like, let's say you go to a truck and you get an ice cream cone, and it's like 90 degrees outside. You have like 2 minutes before that thing starts dripping all the way down your hand. So not only is your hand a complete mess, you have to hurry up and eat this ice cream cone. Like, you're also just losing ice cream. Like, the ice cream's dripping down your hand onto, like, the sidewalk. Like, I'm speaking as somebody who's clearly done this a few times and just has a very strong distaste for having ice cream on his hand. So just give me a bow every time. Like, I want preserve my ice cream. Like, I pay for ice cream. I want all the ice cream. I don't want to drip it down my hand. I don't have to wash my hand or, like, lick the ice cream off your hand and all look ridiculous in public. Like, cones are not practical. Like, I like practicality. Just give me a nice cup. Give me a nice bow. Like, I'm good to go.
You don't like messes?
No, like, I don't like messes. Like, I don't like food on me. Like, it needs to be in the container. So that's...
I can't wait till you have kids. I hope we're still doing the pod whenever you have kids. I can't wait until the first time you take your kids for ice cream and they have just ice cream all over their clothes and their hands. And then they want a hug from daddy, and now it's all over your clothes, and you got to get to the Pistons game and you don't have time to change.
If my kids want to look ridiculous, that's their prerogative. Like, that's cool. You're 5 years old. So if you want to look ridiculous, like, that's all right. People expect it from a 5-year-old child. They don't expect it from a 28-year-old man. I have to, I know people. Like, I have to look presentable. I can't be out in public with an ice cream cone dripping down my hand. Like, that's just...
I know people.
That doesn't fit my lifestyle anymore. Like, I just need the container. And I'm not going to hug. Like, my kid's covered in ice cream, like... You don't get a hug. Like, you can't hug daddy covered in ice cream. Like, that's not how that works.
Bro, you can't turn down a hug anytime the little man or little girl asks for it. I can't wait.
Yes, you can. I'll just be like Omari saying, "Hope for the 3rd. You need to clean up because you're covered in ice cream." Like, I'm not getting ice cream on me just because you have it on you. That doesn't make any sense. That's not fair. I'm going to teach my kid about fairness. Like, what's fair is that you wash your hands and make sure you don't have ice cream on your shirt before you give daddy a hug. I think that's fair.
I cannot wait. I pray more than anything that we're still doing this pod when this happens for you and for Wes. So we've got off a little bit here. Wes, I was going to get some of this stuff from you, but I don't know that we have time today. So put it in the outline for next week. Wes, thank you so much for everything. Amari, take it away, my guy.
Thanks again to everybody for the mailbag questions. We'll do it again, probably closer to the trade deadline, where we could just do a whole trade mailbag pod, I'm sure. So thanks to our editor, Kerry Jr. II, our editors, Kerry Jr. II and Robin Chan. We got them both in this time. It only took us a month. The executive producer, Antoinette Delgado, and our sports editor, Kirkland Crawford. Also, shout out to Wes for moderating our podcast episode today. We'll talk to you all next Tuesday.